I am super excited to be talking about today's subject, and it's because it is the time of year when bass start moving shallow for not only the spawn springtime, but they also stay there for a while. So the lure that I love to throw during this time of year, it's probably one of my top 5 overall, is the Swim Jig. And that's what we're talking about in today's video, is how to pick out the right swim jig, how to retrieve it, maybe some trailers to use, but overall to increase your effectiveness, proficiency, and catching fish on the swim jig. All right, what's going on, guys? My name is Jeremy Francis. I run the page and the channel called Fishing Lone Star. Would love for you to come give me a follow over there, but more importantly, make sure you're subscribed right here to the Monster Bass channel. But today we are talking about swim jigs. Now, I'll be honest, several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't quite understand why throwing a swim jig was really that much better or different, or really I guess why it was important to do versus just throwing a standard paddle tail swim bait. So I used to throw a lot of paddle tail swim baits by themselves. I then started putting them on the back of a swim jig, and I'll be honest with you, I caught just as many fish, and the fish usually were way bigger because there's a bigger profile here with the jig. Now, what makes a jig different than a swim jig? Let's talk about the swim jig in particular. You'll see that it is a very narrow profile of the head, right? And that's so that it can come through cover meaning grass, laydowns, timber, lily pads, things that are pad stems, things of that nature, a lot easier with that narrow head design, right? So a swim jig in particular is what we're talking about today. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about in terms of how to pick out the right swim jig. There's usually about 3 different weights. We'll talk about the weight, usually mainly in the head, but the weight, first of all, you got a 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce, and a 1/2 ounce. So how do you know which one to throw and which one to pick? A good rule of thumb, at least for myself, if you're a shallow water angler, pond angler, things of that nature, bank angler, you're probably gonna wanna stick to a 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce. If you fish lakes and fish sometimes some deeper stuff, or maybe you want to pick apart pockets in grass, you probably want to go with 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce, okay? Now, I particularly like using the 1/4 ounce, that's what this one is, when I'm fishing around shallow vegetation, all right? So I don't necessarily want my weight and my lure of the swim jig to drop really fast. I want it to somewhat hover across the top of grass, and I want to be able to reel it slow enough that I don't have to, let me rephrase it. I want to fish it too fast to where I'm just kind of plowing through grass. I want to be able to fish it slow enough where it stays in the strike zone longer. That's when I'll go with a 1/4 ounce. A 3/8 ounce is helpful though if you're fishing vegetation or grass and there's holes or pockets and you want to fish right up to it and kill it and let it drop. Or say you're fishing 5 to 8 foot of water in that range, maybe 10 foot, the 3/8 ounce works really well. If you're fishing kind of that 8 to 10 to 12 foot of water, that's where you're gonna use the 1/2 ounce, and where the 1/2 ounce works really well, okay? So for the most part, I use the 1/4 ounce or maybe the 3/8. I do have some 1/2 ounce swim jigs, and there are times where I find deep vegetation or maybe like deeper points that I wanna throw a swim jig, and that's when I go with the 1/2 ounce. So keep that in mind when you're picking out your weight sizes. Now, one other thing that I think is just as important as weight is the skirt material, all right? And that's this here. You wanna find skirt material that is full. You'll notice how full the body, right, of this skirt is, but also one that's pretty light, okay? The skirt material matters a ton because as that swim jig is moving through the water column, if the skirt is really dense and not, I guess you could say like fluffy, it's just gonna do this. All right. If your skirt material is lighter and fuller, it's gonna flow and kind of like flutter as it moves through the water column, just like a normal bait fish would, okay? So yes, your weight matters, but more importantly, your skirt material matters even more. There's literally swim jigs that are made by some great companies that I've used before, and I gave them all away because the skirt material was too dense. It wasn't fluid enough. It didn't, I guess, kind of move when you pop it. The material just kind of was flat, lifeless, and I didn't really catch very many fish on it. So skirt material matters. Find something that is full, but also, I don't know, light and fluffy. It's kind of how I describe it. All right, next let's talk about the trailer. Now color really quickly, color obviously just match the hatch. If you're fishing in the summer, that's when I use more of kind of like that, more of a bluegill color. If you're fishing more in the spring, that or maybe like that pre-spawn spawn, sometimes a white or shad color. Bluegill still works, so bluegill pattern still works around the spawn because bass hate bluegill around their beds, especially fry garters, kind of that really early post spawn where the males are still around guarding fry. That's where the bluegill pattern will work really well. But those are usually the main ones I use as kind of a white. I'll use a bluegill pattern, and then I'll also use kind of a black and blue or kind of like a black and green if I'm fishing some darker water or stained water. That usually works well too. So that's your colors. Now, let's talk trailers for just a minute. So most of the time I'm using the Egg Zone Swammer. That's a 4-inch paddle tail swim bait. I do cut maybe 1/4 of an inch off the tip of the plastic. You'll see right there, just a little bit is cut off, but that gives me almost the perfect kick, and about 1 inch behind the skirt is how long I want that paddle tail to be. All right, you'll see about 1 inch there behind my skirt. Sometimes I trim the skirts. Most of the time though, I just make sure that the paddle tail comes out about 1 inch behind the skirt. I like a paddle tail a lot. It's probably what I throw 90% of the time, mainly because it has a really good lifelike swimming action behind the swim jig, and it thumps really well, and it just draws a lot of fish in. There are times though that I will use, this is actually the exact same swim jig, but I will use kind of a little grub style trailer. This is called the J-Bug by V&M, but I'll use this kind of twin tail little grub that flutters, usually in more pressured water, or if I'm fishing clear water where I don't want as much action, but I still want a little bit of a kick and flutter, that's when I'll use the twin tails here. Now you'll see, I'll put these two up side by side. These are the exact same swim jig. Both of them are about 1 inch, right, that hangs down below the skirt. And you'll see the two different profiles. I should turn them this way though. And these both kick. This one just thumps a little bit harder. This one thumps a little bit less, right? So two different style trailers. A lot of people will use a crawl as well. There's nothing wrong with that. I personally don't use a crawl. I prefer more of just a natural swimming motion rather than like a thump or a kick of the crawl legs. I feel like it's a little bit too erratic, but sometimes you want that if you're fishing more stained waters. All right, last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's talk about the gear really quickly and then the retrieval. All right, so the gear that I'm using, I love throwing this on the loose hypermag. Now, yes, this is a high-end reel, but the reason why I like this so much is because the reel and this particular rod combo weigh less than 10 ounces. The reel itself is less than 5 ounces, I think 4.8 or so, 4.9 ounces for the hypermag. It is super light, love it a lot, and I do throw that on a, you can use a medium heavy to a heavy 7.3 or so fast action rod. That's gonna give you the power you need to set the hook. And look, don't be afraid. Most swim jigs have a very stout hook. You'll see how thick and wide that hook is. Most swim jigs have a pretty big hook. Don't be afraid to jack them. All right, guys, don't be afraid to set the hook really hard because you're gonna need it to really drive that hook into the fish's mouth. And then the line that I'm using is a 20-pound fluorocarbon. Some people use 14, 17. Our water here in Texas where I fish is 2-foot visibility, maybe 3 foot at best. I'm not worried about the fish seeing the line. I've never had an issue with fish seeing the line, but 20-pound fluorocarbon allows me to stick them and get them up out of whatever I'm fishing. Now, if you're fishing around a lot of vegetation and a lot of grass, say like Lake Okeechobee, you want to use braid. Most of my lakes, there is vegetation, but there's also a lot of timber. You don't want braid around timber because braid will actually cut into the wood, not cut through the wood, all right? So fluorocarbon will work better around timber. Braid works better around like really heavy grass and vegetation, like a place like Okeechobee. So if I'm fishing a place like Okeechobee, I'm using braid. If I'm fishing more like open water around timber but some vegetation, I'm going to use fluorocarbon and 20-pound. This is the Vicious Fishing Pro Elite is what I use, and it works great for me. So there's your setup. Let's talk about retrieval. All right, there's two retrievals. One is pretty simple. You just point and reel. Literally almost point right at it and reel. It's a slow retrieve. If you hit something, pop it up. It's usually some vegetation, timber, lay down, whatever, pop it up. It comes through cover really well because you have that big weed guard covering the hook, all right? But it's just a point and retrieve. The reason why it's easy to point at it and retrieve is because, it's important to do that is because when you get a bite, it's a big hook set. I'm gonna try not to hit my rod on the top of the ceiling, but a big hook set up to your shoulder, okay? I fish rod in my right and my left hand, reel with my right. So I'm going from here all the way up to my right shoulder when I get a hook set. If you're fishing obviously right-handed, you're gonna do the opposite and you're gonna go this way and setting your hook, right? But it's a big, hard hook set and real fast, right? The other retrieval that I probably use even more, I call it the Alabama shake. I'm not really sure what the exact verbiage is, but I'm basically reeling and kind of pumping as I'm reeling, and I'm kind of just doing this, right? Or I'm just kind of shaking my rod as I'm reeling and kind of giving it a quick kind of pumping action as I'm steadily reeling. And what that's doing, and the reason why, is because the entire time that skirt is, you can see just as I do this, as I shake, look how that skirt kind of flares up, all right? So it does the same thing in the water, and that flaring action right there in the skirt looks like a bait fish fleeing away from bass. And so you're getting almost that reaction bite as they're seeing this come through the water column, all right? So kind of that fluffing of the skirt action as you shake, as you pump or shake your rod while you're retrieving is going to give you a lot of good bites and reaction bites. Now, if I'm fishing a lot of thick vegetation, I'm just steady retrieving because as the lure is coming through that vegetation, the skirt's already kind of flaring out. So I don't need to shake or pump my rod tip, but it is helpful when there's maybe your vegetation, but not quite as much. It's not quite as thick, and you still want to have kind of that movement and the skirt to flare up a little bit. When you still want that to happen, that's when the Alabama shake works really well. All right, guys, so that's a quick rundown of at least some really helpful tips that are going to get you out on the water with a swim jig and get you a ton of success. I will tell you, do not be afraid, do not be shy to step into throwing the swim jig. Most people that do it love it because they catch a lot of fish, they catch really big fish, and they're hooked on the swim jig. I absolutely love throwing the swim jig all the way from the spring all the way through summer into the beginning of fall. I pretty much have a swim jig tied on and on the deck of my boat at all times. It's one of my top 5 lures, and everything I just shared is going to help you have a ton of great success on the water. If you've got something else that maybe you got a question about, or you even think, hey, this would be a helpful tip, maybe I left it out, drop it in the comments below. I always come back and read them all, check them all, as does the Monster Bass team. So make sure you drop us some comments. Let us know what you think about the swim jig. We'd love to hear your feedback. And make sure you subscribe right here to the Monster Bass channel because we're bringing you a ton of helpful videos and tips. And we like hearing from you. So subscribe, comment, like the video, and look forward to talking with you down in the comments below. So until next time, get out, use the swim jig, and go catch a monster bass.